Everyone, welcome to our Diversity Advisory Board meeting. It is June 14th, and as a reminder, our meeting is being recorded. Just a couple quick things before we jump into our agenda. First of all, we've had an entire election since our last meeting, and I just wanted to give a little shout out to Ugana, who was elected to the Beaverton School Board. That's huge. Congratulations to you, Ugana. Very well earned. And we're also going to take a quick look, if we could just get our guiding principles on screen. Just as a reminder, these live on the back of our agenda for every meeting, and I just want to remind everyone that these agreements serve as our guidelines for our meetings, time and space that we have together. So please be mindful of those as we continue to engage in discussions. We do have a lot planned for our meeting today. So thanks, Alexis, for sharing those. And again, those can be found on the back of your meeting agenda. All right, I'd like to direct your attention first to our meeting minutes from May. Do I have any comments or revisions on those meeting minutes? And if not, I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I motion.
Thanks, Ahmed. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Manijay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Those minutes are approved. And we have a quick update to our bylaws. Yeah, Alexis, am I doing it right? That Alexis is going to share with us. Very minor, but I think it's a standard update to a lot of the boards and commissions bylaws that is happening right now at the city.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I was just realizing as I was looking back at the agenda that there was so much prep, so many prep materials. This did not actually make it on that email to you all, so I apologize for that. But I'm going to share screen and just show you. It's really just one piece that has some clarifying language to make sure it matches the ordinance. So as Rachel mentioned, a lot of the boards and commissions right now are getting their minor changes to their bylaws, or more major in some cases, but they like to just do this all at once because it takes a while to get through the city attorney and get through the city council. So while other boards have bigger changes, they just reviewed the DAB bylaws, and the only change that they made was what you see here, where they changed the purpose statement, slightly modified to match the existing ordinance. So at some point we had modified that, and it wasn't in line with what is on the books. So you can see here, it says the purpose of the board is to advise the city on diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies that strengthen the relationships among diverse community groups, including historically underrepresented communities, specifically communities of color, immigrants, and refugees, and with city government. So you can see the other language over here. It's very, very, I'll just untrack change it. So you can see it's very minor. It's basically the same statement, but with some different language that just was already sort of set in stone ahead of time. The rest of the document is unchanged, and it's what you all have and what is, oh, I'm sorry, except for that minor change of capitalization, and is what is on the website. So this is just kind of a formality to have a vote to acknowledge these changes, approve these changes as a board. So if you wouldn't mind, Rachel, just calling for a vote or any discussion if you all have discussion.
Sure, I guess I'll just ask first, does anybody have any comments on that?
I have a quick question, if I may. If we were to seek to add additional language to it, is that a process that we would do in-house, or what would that look like?
That is a good question, and I wish that Councilor Soucie was here tonight. He is not able to be with the board tonight because he has some family commitments. It is something that has to go through City Council, and they are the ones that establish the board. So I think it would be a matter of proposing and then dialogue with them, and they would ultimately have authority over that. But certainly that has happened in the past, so it's something that could happen. It's just a little distinct from, say, a nonprofit board, that the board itself is the authority around making the changes, if that makes sense.
We don't have authority, but I was just curious about like advising on what policy and funding. I think that would be beneficial to be in here, because if there is policy and funding that's coming down the pipeline from the city, then, you know, in terms of in-house, you know, the diversity advisory board kind of makes sense, as opposed to people doing stuff for us, as opposed to with us, you know, as best practice. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you, so one option certainly would be for the board to say, you want me to go back and investigate what the process would be to more specifically to propose some additional changes rather than voting to adopt it tonight?
I don't,
like to?
I'd open it up for other people to comment. I don't want to be, you know, I guess hear other voices, but then also I realize we have a super packed agenda as well.
Alexis, can you explain why we remove anything belong for refugee and immigrant and community of colors from that too?
That language is not removed. I can flash it back up there again. So as you see it now, this is, you know, how track changes work. Like I can either expand it so you can see what's been crossed out, or I can make it go away so you can see what the final language is. So you can see that it does include, so specifically communities of color, immigrants, and refugees, and with city government.
Manise,
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to go with Brandon and kind of don't like to vote on it or right now today, if it's possible.
Alexis, can you see me? Because I've been raising my hand like crazy, like 3 times.
Well, I can't see you when the screen is shared, but now I can see everybody. Go right ahead.
I just want to support Brandon's ideas. I think that's very, very necessary.
Great.
Okay, sounds like for the sake of time, Alexis, if you could do a little bit of research and we'll revisit this in July. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Okay, thanks. All right, that'll move us right along to public comment then.
Great. So anybody who is at the meeting and would like to make a comment, if you could please raise your virtual hand or put something in the chat. We have Jenna up first. I'll go ahead and let her go first, but then I know there's some other folks on the line. So if you want a spot, please indicate that now. Go ahead, Jenna.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Hughes. I am a city planner with the Community Development Department with the city, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. I just want to let you all know that we're having a virtual open house for the Housing Options Project. So you might remember, I think back in December, Rob Zeller came and presented about the Housing Options Project, which is looking at exploring different ways to allow different housing types and neighborhoods, especially using a racial equity lens. So this is really just an opportunity to learn more about the project. There are different alternatives that the city is now looking at and would like feedback on. And so this is just an opportunity to look through the project materials and and fill out a survey. There's also an opportunity to get a gift card. You can, there will be a raffle, and 10 winners will get a $25 gift card to a local Beaverton business. And let's see, it closes the end of June, and it's also available in Spanish. So please share with your networks. And the link is below. It's the same for English and Spanish, beavertonoregon.gov/hop. And that's it. And if you have any questions, I'll be here the whole meeting, and I'll post Rob's email in the chat if you have any questions about HOP. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenna. I see Jody next, and then we'll go to Uma. You should be
Hi,
able to
everyone.
speak now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, this is Jody Monroy, and I wrote something out I'd like to read. Hello, Deb, and thank you for your thoughtful work as always. Some of you may know me as the contracted Beaverton Night Market Manager, and I really appreciate the honor. I also work at Beaverton High School as a graduation mentor, and I work almost exclusively with low-income Black and Brown youth and their families in this area. A few of you also know that I started a nonprofit organization last year to provide supports, capital, and community to youth in Beaverton who have been negatively affected by our unjust systems. I have attended almost every DAB meeting for the last 6 years and have tried never to give my opinion, but instead to be a listener and learner, and I've learned a lot. But today I feel compelled to say something during this public comment, so I appreciate the space. To echo Brendan's statements, there's a ton of money that is being funneled down from the federal government to the state and to local governments through COVID relief. And I'm very concerned that this money will not reach the most affected communities who are the undocumented, the non-English speaking, and poor families of color in our area. And those are the ones that are least able to access resources. I want to bring some attention here to the fact that the city is spending a lot of money to urbanize with the new police station, the arts center, the downtown area, which we all know will ultimately benefit the most affluent or rich people. The resources and supports that are currently getting attention and gaining support will also benefit only some people, because being underhoused and struggling with mental health looks different in communities of color. For example, a family like, say, from Latin America, from Mexico, who would be struggling economically and at risk for being houseless, would probably stack 20 people in an apartment rather than go to a shelter. There are many other ways in which services are often, which I'm sure y'all know, which are often not accessible to low-income families of color. And so resources often get drained by those who are the most able to access them. One of the things that has become really clear in this time of the pandemic and social justice and everything is that racial inequities continue to have a negative effect despite good intentions. And that's exampled by a lot of the, business loans and grants that were offered that didn't reach communities of color. I've been observing and noticing over the past few years on the downtown equity project currently happening, as well as the Allen Boulevard project that happened a few years ago, and lots of times in DAB meetings and other spaces that ask for a multicultural center. And so I just really want to encourage and empower DAB members to be, as well as myself, to be very bold in our requests to the city leadership for this space and for resources that are culturally specific and supports families, immigrant families, families of color in this area, because I feel like our community has waited long enough and it's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Uma, the microphone is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me in this meeting. This is my first time attending. And thank you, Alexis and Manisha, for inviting me to this meeting. I used to be a diversity and inclusion leader in my previous career. So this is an honor for me to join your team, and something that I've just learned about. I've been to some of your events. So I hope that in the future I can be useful somehow. But in the meantime, I just want to basically let you know that I'm also a loan officer who basically provides a complimentary mortgage review to those that are looking for, whether they qualify for different rates, if they qualify for different loan products. I'm just happy to help. So at this time, I don't really have much to share other than simple information. I will go and just provide my information in the chat. But yeah, if anyone is looking for a complimentary mortgage information on it, I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Uma. All right, I think those are all of our public comments for tonight.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you to our guests for being here this evening and sharing those thoughts with us and information. As Alexis already mentioned, Councilor Soucie is unable to be with us tonight. So our liaison report is just going to consist of an HTAG report from Teresa. So Teresa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everyone. Teresa here. And my thunder was stolen a little bit, but that's okay. So please, please, please participate in HOP to spread the word on the opportunity to give your opinion on housing options within the city of Beaverton. As many of you know, throughout this year and my Housing Technical Advisory Group, or HTAG, reports, there's been a lot going on within the city of Beaverton and a lot of projects. This summer, we're starting to get a lot of feedback from those contractors on how the projects are doing through reports, status reports. So I will continue to give you updates. But as we're knowing the status of different projects, such as the Mariah and the facility that will replace the Beaverton Community Center and the facility that will be in the Cooper Mountain area, South Cooper Mountain specifically, that I would encourage everyone to continue to be engaged. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about that, feel free to reach out to me. And Jenna, once again, gave a fantastic report on HOP, which is about housing options. So if you care about the housing in Beaverton in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, please provide your feedback. Even if you yourself are not looking for housing, your feedback is still very much appreciated. And that is my report. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Teresa. Glad there's some overlap on this information. Means everybody's on the ball. All right, so with that, we jump right into our first presentation this evening. We've got a few folks from the Five Oaks Museum here with us tonight to give a presentation on the People's History of Beaverton project. Not sure if Alexis wants to introduce this a little bit more, but I'll throw it over to her.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, well, I mostly just wanted to give them a shout out and give the board, just say a few words to the board. I put this in my prep email for the meeting, but I asked the Five Oaks team to come and present tonight to you all. They're doing some really fantastic work that we've contracted with them to help us really kick off this project and dig into what exists in terms of the research that helps us build an anti-racist history of Beaverton. And they've just been incredible partners in both developing sort of the approach to the project, and then of course incredible resources in terms of what's available and how to wrestle with some difficult questions along the way of how do we really do this in an authentic way. So I just want you all to know that the framing of the project as the People's History of Beaverton is something that comes from the city. It's something that I think is one of the things that we may wrestle with and you all may help us wrestle with. That's not the frame necessarily that these folks have put on it, but they've come to sort of give you some background and to help us bring you all in early to this project, to think about how you all are partners and advisors on the larger project and really the direction that it's going. So they have also shared some initial documents and a presentation with you that is in rough form on purpose, because we're coming to you before this is all baked, right? We want you all to be able to help advise on the direction that this is going. So I'm here as a resource for questions or comments but I'm really happy to have Victoria and Molly and Linden and Mariah here. And it looks like Nat is also here from Five Oaks. So you get everyone, which is awesome, or almost everyone, I think, on the core team. And you may know them from their really incredible work in the community and different exhibitions that maybe they will touch on. But this is Kalapuya Land is one that you may have seen in the downtown area in a sort of traveling exhibit format, etc. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here and for being partners on the project.
Thank you, Alexis, for that introduction, and hi to everyone on the DAB. Super excited to be here tonight and share about our research project with you. We're going to start with a presentation about our research process and some of the questions that have come up for us, and then we'll have a conversation after that with all of you. So.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Mariah. I'm one of the researchers and staff members of Five Oaks Museum working on this project. And so Alexis shared a little bit about how the city has contracted with Five Oaks Museum to do this research project. And we'll just share a little bit more about the project background, a little bit more about our institution, and then some of our findings. And like Victoria said, we'll open it up for discussion. So the purpose, as per Alexis's communications with us and the city's communication, the purpose of this project is to compile and share an anti-racist history of Beaverton that centers people of color, creates a foundation for equitable city policy development, and supports a shared identity among people of all backgrounds living in Beaverton. So some of the project goals and deliverables that we are going over together will be, for us at Five Oaks Museum, the main portion of what we're doing is creating a list of Black, Indigenous, and otherwise people of color individuals across Beaverton history that have contributed to shaping Beaverton's story. And these bios can be used in a variety of ways, but primarily we have discussed using them in place naming initiatives and in educational efforts. And so at Five Oaks, we're gathering the historical information, working in partnership with a few different Beaverton archives and libraries, and with City of Beaverton researchers and intern researchers. And so we're hoping that this historical information can expand the traditional dominant narrative of Beaverton history to include BIPOC communities and individuals. And then there's a few other pieces that are being worked on simultaneously, not necessarily by Five Oaks, but some of that is looking at racist policies and practices at federal and state levels, as well as city levels, and then exploring how these policies have shaped community formation and a sense of identity in Beaverton. All right, and this is a big undertaking. So this project is going to be spread out over a few different phases and years. Currently, we're in phase 1, where we're educating and informing internal decision makers at the city before turning this research loose onto the public. And so we're thinking, so where we're at right now is like I said, gathering and researching those BIPOC individuals and groups and compiling near to complete biographies for each of them, as near to complete as we can. And then those biographies are going to be turned into some educational materials that can be used, again, with internal decision makers and stakeholders. And then phase 2 is going to be turning that research outward facing and looking more at community engagement within the wider Beaverton community. And then phase 3 is I think still, we're still kind of shaping what it's going to look like. So much of this has been shaped as we've gone along and seen what we have been able to find. But the idea is that this information will be very much public facing in the future. All right, and who are you working with? We're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves now. So like I said, I'm Mariah. I'm the Cultural Resources Manager. My research focus in this project has been looking at our own internal collection, going through our archive and our object collection, which has some 100,000 objects in it, all related to Washington County history. And I will also be working on the interpretation once we're out of the research phase.
And I am Victoria Sundell. I'm the head of integrated learning at Five Oaks Museum. And in this project, I've been working in research in special subject areas. So specifically Indigenous and tribal history, the tech field, and then some of our present day partners. And then I will be involved in the interpretation and design parts of those educational materials, because educational materials is a big part of what I do with the museum.
My name is Linden Howe. I am the critical librarian at Five Oaks Museum. And the research that I have been invested in is kind of networking with other archives and libraries and in Beaverton specific and statewide to try to locate some more information that might be missing from our own collections. So that's what I've been focusing on.
Hi, I'm Molly Alloy, and I have been serving as sort of project manager, just mostly helping to touch base with the team internally and then liaise with Alexis and just try to keep things flowing smoothly. And we didn't realize, but my co-director Nathaniel was able to join us this evening, so I'll love to share my introduction with Nathaniel and share that Nathaniel's was actually kind of the first person working on this project and remains in the wings, helping us manage the actual contracts and how we formally engage with the city, an important but sometimes invisible part of the project. Nathaniel, if you want to say hi real quick.
Thanks all. Thanks, Molly. Hey, so I'm Nat or Nathaniel Andrini, been with the museum for just under 5 years and super happy to be here and bear witness to this this meeting and check out the presentation more in depth because it's also my first time seeing it. So thanks for having me and good to be here.
All right, so we're going to share a bit about where Five Oaks Museum is coming from as an institution. We were founded with the Native Sons and Daughters of Oregon, which was a European American pioneer like affinity group in the early 1900s and grew as a pioneer museum focused on collecting objects of white settlers and telling their stories in the community. So very much a part of creating that so-called traditional or dominant narrative of Beaverton. We were a big part of that. In the 80s or 70s, 80s, we built a building on the PCC Rock Creek campus north of Hillsborough, and that is where our museum continues to be located today. Through the years, the museum has made attempts at inclusion, often on a surface level rather than on a decision-making level, but that has changed in, I think we started our transformation in 2019 and then officially became Five Oaks Museum in January 2020. As Five Oaks Museum, we center community members telling their own stories through a guest curator program that creates our exhibitions, and all of our work is centered around our 5 values, which you can see on the side there. So we've really been on a journey of learning and dismantling and rebuilding to find out how to be an ethical institution, an ethical museum, and really be for and of the community that we serve. And we are perhaps most well known for our 2019 exhibition, This is Kalapuyan Land. You can see a view of the gallery here. So that also gives you a sense of what our museum space looks like and how big we are, which is to say a fairly small museum, but with a very large collection. In this exhibition, a guest curator who's Kalapuyan from Grand Ronde, Steph Littlebird-Fogel, took these sepia-toned information panels about the tribe that had been written from a settler perspective and wrote right on them actually to bring in a Calipuyan perspective and point out the biases in the institutional history. And then she also curated in artwork to really show the vibrance of contemporary Indigenous folks today. And then you can see pieces of the exhibition around the community in our This is Calipuyan Land yard sign exhibitions. So as we've been going through this research project, Lyndon's going to share more about the challenges and successes.
Thank you, Victoria. So as Mariah and Victoria mentioned, this has been a process so far that has been pretty fluid in that we have responded and changed directions a few times with our research, depending on, you know, what is or is not available. One of the biggest challenges we come up against in doing, especially earlier historical research, is the lack of narrative and documentation of BIPOC people from this area's history. The people who decided how the record was going to be and what it was going to reflect were by and large white people. And so there's a lot left out there in the narrative that we have been trying to combat in a different number of ways. A lot of policies relating to housing and things like that in Beaverton have also influenced the number of records of historical residents that we've been able to find. Up until the 60s and 70s, there were pretty strict laws around who could and could not live in Beaverton. Another challenge we faced was just some of the materials that we want to access aren't digitized yet. And while I personally would have loved to go around to all the different kind of archives and things like that, most things are closed right now due to the pandemic. But some successes we've had have been just engaging other community members and organizations who are interested in telling these histories as well. Archives from the state level to the city level, different museums in the area and libraries in particular. I want to give a special shout out to the Beaverton City Library, who allowed me graciously to come in and do some research there on microfilm of some old newspapers. Another great resource for us has been the Immigrant Story. Some of you may be familiar with it already, but it's a volunteer organization that documents and highlights stories of immigrants to the US. And there are many people involved in it based in this area. We have been very grateful for the strong support we have received from Alexis in kind of feeling out this process and the kind of latitude that we've been allowed to look at the problem of some of these challenges from a variety of different perspectives, which, as I mentioned, has led us to be able to be really adaptable in this process so far, and has generated a lot of ideas for us as we move into phases in the future that will involve more research. I think we have a number of exciting ideas for how to engage in histories that may have been left out of the historical record. So I think next we're going to be just pulling out and talking about a couple of individuals that we found in this research, just to kind of give you an idea of what this is beginning to look like.
Yeah, so we're going to give you 3 examples, just a little taste of it. So sort of representing our 1800s time period, one bio that has stood out to us is Kayakat, who is known as the so-called last chief of the Tualatin Kalakuya in the 1850s. And he is particularly memorable for standing for indigenous land rights. He lived in the Lake Wapato area, which is near present-day Gaston. And there's a story of when a settler built a cabin on his land, then he tore it down, and it actually ended up going into a court case that was decided in Kayakat's favor. And so he has, as he had a high standing in the tribe, he has been somewhat recorded, and you can see him in the written documentation here. This is an example of one of the challenges of early history of Beaverton, is that, well, he never technically lived in Beaverton. And so there's a question of who is relevant to Beaverton's history. Do you have to be a resident? Do you have to have worked in Beaverton? Do you have to have some other relationship to the land that Beaverton is also part of? And then, yeah, that is what I've got to say. All right.
Our next individual is Jim Tsugawa. This is a person who has a fairly well documented history. He's been very open about his experience growing up in this area, and also his experience of being in a concentration camp at Minidoka for Japanese Americans during World War II. So his family lived in this area as farmers until they were incarcerated in 1942. Minidoka is in Iowa. Idaho. And they lived around Boise for a while until they moved back here. By the time Jim was a high schooler, he was attending, I'm so sorry for my dog. He was attending Beaverton High School and was the only Japanese American and the only student of color at the entire high school in 1947. Today, you can find his story, like I mentioned, on the immigrant story, and there he also has an oral history that he did for the Japanese American Museum of Oregon that's accessible online if you want to learn more about him at this stage.
All right, and the last individual we're going to share tonight is Luz Macia Villarreal. Luz immigrated to Oregon from Guadalajara when she was a child, and she went to, did her schooling between Mexico and Oregon, and went to college at OSU and in Monmouth. And when she was a student, she founded the first Latino Cultural Center at OSU in the 1970s. And she went on to have a really wonderful career dedicated to education and uplifting minority students throughout the state of Oregon. And she worked at the PCC Rock Creek campus and at Beaverton School District as the bilingual and multicultural counselor, and had just a super notable career of uplifting students every opportunity she could, and especially working with migrant workers and their families, making sure that they had access to literacy programs, and not only to literacy programs, but to cultural heritage activities, such as establishing some of the first folklorico dance groups in the state and some of the first Cinco de Mayo celebrations in the state. And as of 2019, she was a coordinator at the PCC Dream Center. And she has an oral history in our collection from 2001. And she's someone that we actually are hopeful in this project we can reconnect with as she's still alive. She's very much still active in the Latino community in the Beaverton area and in Washington County. And so we're hopeful that we can continue to learn from her and continue to document her history in our collection for this project. Okay, and so with that, you've gotten a taste of what we're working on. And we have some questions for you all, and then we very much would love to hear your questions for us. You can see the questions on the screen, but some of what's come up for us is related to the challenges in the research process that Linden shared. How do we tell the story of the exclusion and erasure that we have found? For a while in our research project, it was more common for us to find a documented example of exclusion than of a person of color in the record. And so that's something that we feel like needs to really be talked about in this People's History of Beaverton. So that's one question we have. And then we are also open, we'd love to know what your desired role is in this project. Like Alexis said, it's not fully baked yet. We're coming to you pretty early on in the process still. And so we would love to know what the advisory board's role in this project can be. And how do you see us shaping this project to be buy-in for the people of Beaverton? And then looking towards future phases, how can we format our findings so that they can be the best resource possible for the widest group of people? All right, so with that, we'll turn it over. I see Teresa has her hand raised. Shall we go right for it? Am I moderating this? Am I facilitating this?
Would you mind, Mariah, would you mind stopping share, or whoever's doing that, so we can see everybody again?
Oh, yes.
And maybe we can take those questions and pop them in the chat, but I think there are already folks that are queued up that have some comments. So I'm happy to help moderate, or you don't, or we can do it however. I think I saw a hand, but now it's not up anymore. So put your hands up, y'all, who would like to jump in. Teresa, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to give kudos to you guys. That was a wonderful presentation. I can say from my own experience, I did in 2019 as a part of Leadership Beaverton through the Beaverton Area Chamber of Commerce participate in the exhibition, This is Kalapuyan Land, and it was beautifully done. The personal storytelling was fantastic. I feel like she was able to answer as many questions that people had, in addition to giving detail and perspective that is, well, obviously authentic, but better than any museum director, no offense, or employee staff member, because when you're telling a story about a specific exhibition, it is not from your firsthand experience. It is from whatever cue card you read and trying to memorize it, right? So from that perspective of firsthand experience, storytelling is just genius. It's fantastic, and I encourage you to continue to do that. And I was very happy that pre-COVID life, I was able to experience that because it was wonderful. I wanted to try and touch really quickly, I know there are other hands, the first question that you posed to us, how do we tell the story of the exclusion? And I just want to share my thought on that within the city of Beaverton, and I know it's a question that you continue to ask yourselves, how can we reflect the families that lived here? There are still families, but they have moved out. I can say for my own family, being African-American, that I had relatives that did move into Beaverton in the 70s and 80s, but were pushed out because they did not sell the beauty products in the store, and it was too much of a hassle to try and commute back and forth to Portland for basic things, going to the grocery store and not being able to find certain things for dietary restrictions. Typically, a lot of African-American diaspora descent people have a hard time breaking down the enzymes in regular cow milk, so goat milk, and trying not to explain yourself when you say, no, I can't have that for dietary restrictions. And it's not like, oh, I don't like strawberries. It's no, I have a physical reaction to those things, right? So that cultural aspect that ties into what helps someone to stay in a place, but also the way they are treated. So I know from my own family perspective that there are people who have moved out of the city of Beaverton years ago because the resources were not there, or the treatment, or whatever. So as you continue to do your research, similar to the last chief that you were able to find information on of the 1850s, that you may have to go outside of Beaverton to continue to collect information on Beaverton. So I would just throw that little tidbit. And with that, I yield my time to whoever has their hand up.
Yeah, we're going to go to Alex next, and then Rihanna.
Hello, remove this hand. I'll figure it out later. Yeah, I think the project sounds really cool and kind of a question, and also addressing your question, like hearing about the exhibit. It's like, oh, I'm sad that I missed it. And I, at some point, actually tried to do some research on this. And as you said, like pretty much none of it's digitized online. So I'm wondering if you're planning on largely digitizing and putting the results of your results, the stuff you find online. That was coherent.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is something that we're thinking about in the upcoming phases. You know, this first phase starts with the internal at the city of Beaverton, and then as we move outward, that I think it addresses our question of how can we format it to be the best resource for the people in the future. And I can definitely imagine that maybe the answer to that is putting more of these resources online.
Go ahead, Rehana, and then we'll have Brandon next.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Very comprehensive and really interesting. So I think one of the ways that you could, improve the exposure is introducing it into the curriculum in the Beaverton School District. I think the youth would benefit from knowing, the history of Beaverton and especially the BIPOC community and the students. They want to know where their ancestors, how prevalent they were in the Beaverton area. Also, I think maybe you can arrange visits for the elementary or the middle school kids to the museum in sections. Teachers can initiate that, principals can initiate that. At least that way they can see it in person, the exhibition. I think that's a good way, for students. And, students talk amongst each other and they can spread the story. They can spread it to their parents. They can go home and tell their parents, their siblings, oh, look, I read about this person today. And, I think it's just wonderful that there is information out there which can be valuable to across the board. Also, another question, are you open to us giving us suggestions, names within our respective communities? Because I know a couple of people that have been in Beaverton for 40, 50 years that you would be interested in knowing the, history. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah. Did you want to say that, Molly?
Oh, sorry, Alexis. But on that suggestion, that is something that we guessed that you all collectively would be a great resource. But what we hadn't done was figure out the best way to capture that information from today's meeting. So I don't know, Alexis, or those of you that sort of coordinate the meeting, what feels like the cleanest way for folks to be able to share that, if it's in the chat or over email? Or
I think if one of you is, if it's appropriate for one of you to just receive that information to provide a main contact, and then folks can reach out individually. I hope that we all get to hear those stories, but we don't necessarily need to be like a triangulation thing. So maybe there's one of you that could be a point for everyone, and I can put it in that contact in the minutes as well.
that sounds great. I'm happy to be that person. Shall I just put my contact info in the chat here, and then you can capture it in the minutes as well?
Great.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Rehana.
Go ahead, Brandon.
I'll drop my thanks in the chat after I'm done to keep it a little bit shorter. But one of the things that we are working with at the Beaverton School District, when we look back into the history, so I'm working on curriculum for folks that may not know, with the Beaverton School District and social studies on the project team, is like like when we seek to tell stories that may be not ours, to decenter ourselves from the origin, a framework of telling that story. So instead of westward expansion, eastward invasion, and that's really remarkable in the work that you've done with this is Kalapuya land. And so from that same kind of framework of, there's a lot of fluidity with the Kalapuya and many other tribes as they move through the valley. And to me, it just almost seems like kind of handicapping it just a touch if you just focus on current boundaries. And then it kind of, it presupposes like a colonial infrastructure while we seek to decolonialize the histories that are told. I mean, and it just because a village site necessarily wasn't like smack dab doesn't mean that this area wasn't incorporated when we take into account, 15,000 years scientifically, time immemorial, like the Kalapuyan DNA is interlocked with these lands and these alluvial soils. So thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Other comments or questions at this point for the team or on any of the questions that they asked around how you tell those stories, DAB's desired role or format of findings, and maybe kind of a last call because we've got some other things coming up on the agenda. Go ahead, Monica.
I was reading this earlier, that part, but I'm a person that I like to read more, get informed more, understand better. And I would like to see if after reading this, I will come out with something, some questions or some comments, and I can reach out directly to them, because it sounds very incredibly interesting, but I'm not very knowledgeable about it. I want to learn more. I want to understand better and send you a very positive and very constructive questions or comments. Could that be possible to address any, the group anytime by email or anything? Could it be possible to do that?
Yes, absolutely. I see Molly was trying to unmute themselves. Yes, I think emailing Molly and Alexis can help distribute their email address, which is also in the chat now. That would be the best way to do that.
This presentation is very fascinating and I want to learn more. Then thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Monica. And just, to re-say for myself, all of you, please feel free to use my email address for any purpose of following up at any time. Like we said, this is going to be a long-term project, and we're really interested in your feedback all throughout. And I know it's sort of some big questions that we asked you today, in particular for you to have a strong sense of what you want your own role to be when we've just introduced this right now. So please don't think that there will be a time frame that becomes closed where we're no longer interested in hearing from you or hearing in what kind of role you would like to have. So yeah, please, give it some thought. I think Alexis, you shared out to the group the whole sort of draft as it was, a week ago. That's a living document that we're continuing to work on. And so, understand that you won't see it updated unless you all ask for updates and we can share more. But it will give you, it's something longer you could read now that you have that framework and get a little more information about who we have been able to find in the research and identify where you may be able to see gaps and things like that. And just know that we'll be interested in keeping in touch, and Alexis will help us liaise with you all throughout this work.
Can I make one more comment? I just wanted to share about when I was reading this document, the draft, and some program that we have in mind. I thought we can mingle and put it together and work together through one side and the other when it comes to community information or community engagement. So working together could be so fabulous with the project we have in mind and finding data about different groups and sharing with you guys. So that put it in my head right away when I read that, but I want to be more informed, understand better, so I can put in words in a better way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. I will just say as a closing comment that we envision and we hope and believe that this will be a multi-year project. And so this first year of funding and partnership with Five Oaks, the main deliverable from that is for them to deliver 30 bios of individuals that could form part of this history and also help us kind of figure out how to present that to internal stakeholders. The next phase that we envision, that we have asked for money in the budget, hopefully to be approved soon for next year, is to think about what does that community engagement component look like, much as Monica is suggesting, and lots of other ways, right? And then there's even maybe a third phase, or maybe it's a second/third phase that has to do with, okay, now how do we share this out more broadly, or help educate, or help, you know, provide this information to wider audiences. So this is the very beginning, and we've already sort of charted an ideal path. So we hope to have news for you all in terms of that funding being approved and moving forward, and also what that second phase could look like. So more to come. Thank you all so much, and thank you to our Five Oaks Museum folks. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I'll turn it back to Rachel.
Yeah, thanks so much to our, sorry, yeah, I just texted Alexis, I'm having some computer difficulties right now, so if you lose me, I apologize, and Alexis will take over. But yeah, thank you all from Five Oaks Museum for being with us tonight. Really interesting presentation and a very engaging discussion, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again, and you'll be hearing from us some more as well. We are going to move on next to hear from our police department representative, as well as we have a representative here from the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. This is a follow-up to our discussion last month about the bias-based policing report that came out. I'd like to turn it over first to Lieutenant Stellingworth so he can give a little bit more intro to this part of our agenda.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, hello, everyone. I don't have a big intro. I was not at the meeting last month, but it sounds like there's a lot of information put out to you folks. And I don't know if there's any more questions coming from that meeting last week. But this week, part of that bias-based policing report surrounds a stops data, and the stops data is kind of clearinghouse for that is the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, and we have a guest, Ken. I'm sorry, Ken, if I mess your name up, but I think it's. I'm going to look at it because if I say it off the top of my head, I'm going to say it wrong. So I'll try to read it out here. Ken Sanchagrin. If I said that wrong, I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself. But I'm just going to hand it over to him, and if there's any questions, we'll address that afterwards. Okay.
Thanks for that introduction. And Ken Sanchagrin, I'm here with the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, so very close. I appreciate you all having me here tonight. And I also wasn't present for the meeting last time, but hopefully the information I'm going to provide tonight can shed a little bit of light on what the commission has found through the Statistical Transparency of Policing program for the City of Beaverton Police Department. So what I have here tonight are a number of slides that talk about the data that we collect and the findings that we have for Beaverton, but then also the analytical approach that we take. I was present for the previous presentation, and we're going to be doing a little bit of a 180-degree turn from that, in that this is a very statistical approach. And so please don't hesitate to stop me as we go along, as some of what I have to present is somewhat dense, and hopefully we can just, we can make through together. But the Statistical Transparency of Policing program, which I need to actually share my screen, so I guess I should do that before I get too far into things. Let's see, there we go. Hopefully everybody can see the top slide there for the STOP program. Excellent. So the Statistical Transparency of Policing program is a program that was designed out of legislation that was passed in 2017 by the Oregon legislature. And it was passed in House Bill 2355. And what it did is it mandated that within 3 years of the passage of the bill, that all law enforcement agencies, which there are about 170 law enforcement agencies in the state of Oregon, would begin to collect and report on all discretionary pedestrian and traffic stops. And what we mean by discretionary traffic and pedestrian stops is basically any stop that is not associated with a call for service is reported to the commission by law enforcement agencies. And the data points that I have listed on the slide are reported to us for all of those stops. And so that would be any encounter by a police officer, again, not associated with a call for service, that is either a violation of the Oregon Vehicle Code, or in the case of pedestrian stops, it would be any stop not associated with a call for service that is also not a stop made during a routine entry to a building. So you could think of like going to the Moda Center and having your purse examined. That would be a stop that is not counted for the pedestrian stops. However, if you're stopped outside of the Moda Center by a police officer, that would be a discretionary stop that would be reported. So all of those stops are reported to us, and the information that's provided to us here at the commission are all the vital information about when and where the stop occurred. So that would be the location, the time of day, the day of the week, the information about the stopped individual. And so that would be their race, their age, their gender, and then also what happened during the stop. Why was the individual stopped? What was the outcome? If there was a search conducted, was anything found? And so all of the things that we have on the screen here are to be reported for each stop. And just to give you an idea of the volume that we've been getting over the past few years, I mentioned that it was a 3-year rollout. So we started with our largest agencies in the state, so the 12 largest, including the city of Beaverton, and we got about 500,000 stops for those 12 agencies. We expanded to 54 agencies in year 2, and we had almost 700,000 stops. And then in year 3, which is what we're in right now, we've expanded statewide. And in December of this year, we'll present our first statewide report that includes all agencies within the state of Oregon. So what I'm going to talk about now is just a little bit about the history of examining traffic stops statistically and how that fits into what the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission does when looking at traffic stop data. So traffic stop data analysis has been going on for around 30 years. And what we've learned over 30 years is that doing analyses of this type of information is very difficult, it's very time consuming, it's resource intensive. We have 5 researchers here at the commission who spend the better part of 6 months looking at this data and working through it in preparation for our reports to go out in December. And what I think is really important to note, and I think it's kind of an important, important in light of the type of information that we were talking about, or that the committee was hearing before I started, was that, explaining what the stops data is and it isn't. The stops data is designed to be a statewide look at all traffic stops that occur, or pedestrian stops that occur within the state. And so what the commission has been asked to do is to set statewide standards using statistical analyses to try to flag police agencies that have identified disparities for follow-up by other agencies for technical assistance. What we do not collect is we do not collect the names of individuals who are stopped. We do not collect the names of officers effectuating those stops. And so we lack a lot of other contextual information that would be interesting to have, certainly from a research standpoint, and probably very relevant to examining the interaction that occurs between an officer and a stopped individual. But we don't have that information. Beyond what I presented on the first slide, we don't have those. So I think it's very important to note that while we may try to determine with our analyses whether there is a systematic agency-wide issue with biased policing at a police agency, we are not able to look at those individual interactions. Therefore, we are not able to determine or to adjudicate any individual interaction the person has with a police officer. And so that means that we cannot discount any individual interaction that somebody has with a police officer that they may find harming or traumatic. However, what we are able to do is, as I mentioned, we're able to look at these systematic, department-wide possible issues that we can identify. And that's simply what I have wrapped up here in this one bullet that says, statistical methods cannot prove discrimination. We're not able to prove it one way or the other. So in the past, the most common approach that's been taken in examining police traffic stop data is what is known as the benchmark approach. And the benchmark approach is one that, while it's the most simple and straightforward and most commonly utilized, it's one that academic researchers and the commission we've really moved away from using, because they in and of themselves can oftentimes produce their own biased results. And so I have a little example here, and then we'll move into some more relevant information for the state of Oregon. And the example I have here is from another state who's thought of as having the gold standard for these types of traffic stop analyses, and that's the state of Connecticut. And so what we have here is some Connecticut data that we borrowed from them. And to illustrate what a benchmark approach is you look at the share of stops for a given group or subcategory. And so in this case, what we're presenting on the slide is for the city of Berlin, in the year that this traffic stop data was collected, there were 1,902 stops of African-American or Black individuals, which accounted for a little bit over 22% of all of their traffic stops. What that is then compared to is the census population for that same group. So in the city of Berlin, African-American or Black individuals make up 12.89% of the population. And then a simple ratio is displayed to try to determine or to adjudicate whether there is a disparity. And so in this case, at least for the city of Berlin, there is a pretty significant difference between what we see for the population percentage and the stops percentage. However, when we begin to unpack what these differences really are and where we try to move beyond the work that is done through a simple benchmark analysis, is that when we look at that difference, that gap between the percentage of stopped individuals and the population percentage, what that difference in and of itself does not account for is the fact that there are multiple alternative explanations for what is going on in that gap that we've identified. And when I say alternative explanations, I don't mean things that just may explain away what that difference is. But what's important is for us as researchers to try to isolate the degree to which each of these factors are leading to the difference that we identify. And so as with all statistics and all research, there are probably going to be, there's probably some degree of that difference that will remain unknown. We won't be able to answer why there is that difference. There may be some of that difference that is due to differences in driving behavior. Certainly there is going to be a subset of that difference that is due to racial profiling or racial animus in most cases. However, there are also explanations such as officer deployment patterns or differences in exposure to the police that could explain some of those differences as well. There's been many years of research, for example that shows that persons of color are more likely to ride public transportation or more likely to carpool with one another, which could affect the degree to which they are on the road relative to other racial groups, which could affect that exposure to the police that we're talking about here. And so what we try to do at the commission is to utilize at least the current best practices in statistical analyses to try to suss out or to control for those different factors, so that when we identify a gap, if you will, then we know that it's not being caused, as far as we can tell, by some of these other alternative explanations. So how does this work, or what does this mean for the city of Beaverton? It really means that what we are trying to isolate here is to try to determine how do travel patterns for work, shopping, recreation affect the driving population. Certainly one thing that we've been keeping in mind for this most recent year is how does the COVID-19 pandemic influence the data that we received. We saw a pretty significant drop off in our data submission starting in March of 2020, around March 16th. And so our data looked very different this year than it did in the previous year. We also know that through research and through other publications that we've read that the driving population has changed during the pandemic. I'm very privileged in that I am able to telecommute to work every day that I would like to telecommute to work. So that means that I'm no longer on the road during those business hours, contributing to the driving population who is at risk of being stopped if you're breaking a traffic law. However, we know that many of our frontline workers are not in the same boat as me, and they may be more likely to be Black and brown individuals who are still on the roads. Therefore, they are part of a smaller group of individuals who might be more likely to be pulled over simply because there are fewer people on the roads. And so it means that we need to be cognizant of these differences in the driving population that have occurred over the past year as the pandemic has unfolded and as lockdowns have kind of increased and decreased over time, affecting that driving population. So just to give an example of what we're thinking about as far as work travel patterns, real quick. One thing that we do is there's a really nifty tool online that you can utilize through the census. It's called On the Map. And when you pull up this census data on the map, it actually provides estimates of different population inflows and outflows and other, it's like an interactive mapping program where you can do lots of cool things if you're a data nerd. But one thing that it provides is it actually provides an estimate of how many folks drive into a given city or municipality for work and how many people drive out of that city and then work elsewhere. And what it shows, at least in 2018 for the city of Beaverton, is that the inflow into the city of Beaverton daily for work is 63,038 individuals, which makes up almost 90% of all workers. And so what that means, and this is not necessarily unique to Beaverton. In fact, I've given this presentation to many other cities. Right now, Lake Oswego is the leader, to where they have over 91% of people who work in Lake Oswego come from outside of Lake Oswego. But what we find in many of our Oregon cities is that we are quite transient in that we trade back and forth between where we work and where we live. And I offer this example just to demonstrate that oftentimes when we're thinking about the census population, at least for something like traffic stops in relation to the on-the-road population, at least during morning and evening commute times, which is when we often see our heaviest traffic stop volume, we know that the on-the-road population is oftentimes going to be very different than the census population. In fact, what we see, and this is true of Lake Oswego and many of the metro cities that we've looked at, is that individuals who reside in the city of Portland oftentimes make up more or a larger share of the workers in some of the suburban communities than actual residents of that suburban community. So let's jump in and look at a little bit of data for the city of Beaverton. So real quick, before I talk about the data itself, I do want to note that while we're going through this data relatively quickly tonight, on the Commission's website, we publish annually a full report that will include all of the statistics and details and information that I'm talking about here tonight. You can download that. However, it's a little bit dense. It's about 100 pages because it covers many agencies across the state. So we also offer data dashboards, which allows you to go through both the results from our report city by city, but then also provides a lot of data that you can slice and dice and look at in much more detail than I'm able to present here. So I would encourage you to go onto our website if you have further questions or would like further information, and then feel free to email us if you have questions after that. My researchers can help you out there. But what we can see is that as far as volume within the city of Beaverton, we see that the city of Beaverton is quite busy as far as one of our agencies is concerned. It is one of the 12 largest. However, it is in the top 5 as far as stop volume that we've seen across the state for those largest agencies in both of the reporting years that we have. And so we saw in 2018, 2019, around 20,000 stops that were reported to us. Like I already mentioned, during 2018, 2020, which at least had 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a pretty significant drop off between those 2 years. Across both years, pedestrian stops made up around 5%, maybe a little bit over 5% of stops. The remainder were all traffic stops. The vast majority of stops are for moving violations for all of our racial groups. And this is something that you could look at on our dashboard. It has breakouts by racial group of different types of stops. And approximately 60% of all the stops resulted in what we call no action. So that's just where an officer says that you can go on with your day after stopping you, or with a warning. Which there is a significant amount of variation across the state as to how often that happens, but that's not necessarily very much out of the norm compared to other agencies. We also see that we have a racial breakdown or race and ethnicity breakdown here on the left-hand part of our slide. I have a couple different categories here, some with double dashes that will represent whether those racial categories are collected. And so one area that we have here that you'll notice is that in our stops data, we collect information on stops of individuals who, at least in the data set, are termed to be Middle Eastern. However, there is no corresponding census category for that group. We were hopeful that in 2020, that the US Census was going to begin collecting information on that group. In fact, we expected them to, until the census elected not to. And so that's an area where we do not really have a direct comparison to census categories, but perhaps in the future that will begin to be collected. We also do not collect information on 2 or more races. like the census does. We do not collect that in our stops data. And so that's a little bit difficult to make some of those apples to apples comparisons there.
Ken, you did have a question in the chat just specifically about those race points. If you wanted to address that here.
Yeah, so I can't see the chat currently because of the presentation view. So sorry, Alexis, if you wouldn't mind maybe reading it off to me or
yeah, yeah, no worries. It says, are these data points around officer perceived race or race on state records?
Oh, great question. So this is all about officer perceived race. And it's in part due to the fact that while race is collected at many different junctures in state records, it's not collected on driver's licenses or by the Oregon DMV. And so the only way that we can collect racial information here is by perception. But I also note that what we're trying to determine through the STOPS program is we're trying to get into the mind of the officer. And so in this case, we actually do want their perception because if an officer erroneously pulls over individuals believing they're members of one race, but they happen to be of another, but they do that with an aim towards profiling that group, what we actually want to record is that perception they had, even if it was erroneous. And so that means that we cannot use the stop data as a perfect measure of who is driving on the road or who is being stopped, but it is a way for us to begin to look into the mind of the individual who is stopped, who's doing the stops, excuse me, so that we can try to test for patterns of disparities there. And I see a hand raised by, it looks like, yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, what is the thought process behind not tracking data by officer?
Unfortunately, I would say that was not our decision at the commission. That was worked into the statute, and we are expressly statutorily prohibited from collecting officer information. I'll note that of states that have instituted these wide-ranging data collections like we have, it's split somewhat down the middle as far as whether officer information is allowed to be collected or not. Certainly from a researcher perspective, in most states that collect the information, the researchers receive some sort of dummy identifier for the officer. So you don't receive like their badge number or their TPSST number or something like that. You would just receive an officer's dummy ID. And so you can use that in your statistical models, which can actually help improve the accuracy of the predictions. But in Oregon, we are expressly prohibited from doing so.
And then there was a couple of other questions about that. One, are officers allowed to ask the driver or drivers what their ethnicity is one question. And second question, is there a stop measure that we can compare to city demographics to see the patterns? That may be more of a question for us. But.
Sure. So an officer, at least in the training that most officers are provided, it has been recommended that they do not ask the driver what their race is, because it's supposed to be perception. When the different data points are being developed, there was a lot of concern about trying not to escalate any of the interactions that were between officers and the individuals who are being stopped. I think another good example of that is one data point that we collect is what is the home zip code of the individual who is being stopped. And that is something that you could gain from the driver's license, or you could gain from verbally asking the stopped individual. And what we have been interested in with that one is there's oftentimes an argument that, you know, an officer says like, oh, well, I'm only stopping people from out of town. And so that's another reason why doing a comparison to like a city residential population is not warranted. And so we wanted to be able to collect data points on that. But asking somebody if they're a resident or if they are a citizen of a certain town, we did not want to inadvertently make individuals who may be undocumented feel uncomfortable, for example. So we try to limit the data collection pieces as far as those interactions are concerned as much as we can. And then as far as whether there is a good data comparison, I mean, the census can provide some of a comparison, especially for larger cities. I think that now that we have we will soon have the 2020 census, which is more accurate than the American Community Survey and other sources of data. That is a more apt comparison. But I think too that one of the takeaways that I try to talk about in my talk here is that those comparisons are always going to be fraught with caveats and issues. And so what we try to trust in is the methods that have been advanced by folks within the academy to try to limit the biases that may come in with comparisons to census or other types of data. Certainly, if we did collect information on driver's licenses or something like that, then we might have a better understanding of how that works. But I don't believe that that's something that is going to happen in the future. And I think there's a lot of arguments as to why that probably wouldn't be a good idea as well.
Questions are rolling in. There's one more. Ken, in what states is in-depth information required on ethnicity and race? Could you give an example of the top 5 states that have statutory requirements? And Teresa, you might need to speak up if he has questions on your question.
Certainly. So I'll try to answer, and then please feel free to follow up. So it's very hard to name like a top 5 states. I think that there are some states that do better jobs than others. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's like comparing menus from different restaurants, and that some states may be really good in, so one criticism that I've heard of the stops data, which I think could be an interesting data collection point, is that oftentimes, the make, model, condition, or other characteristics of the automobile may be something that officers could use as a proxy for race and therefore stop people as they drive along. The state of Wisconsin, they actually collect make, model, and year of car, and so that you could utilize some of the data that they have. But they have a lot of other areas where they do not collect sufficient data. And so that is one that is better in one way, but not better in others. Our data collection is modeled off of the state of Connecticut's data collection. And the only place where we differ from the state of Connecticut is they do collect an officer identifier, and we do not. But it is often thought of, the state of Connecticut is thought of, like I mentioned earlier, as the gold standard, at least from a statistical standpoint and an academic standpoint. Their data collection and data collection practices have been peer reviewed within the academy by researchers across the country. And so Oregon, we have modeled our data collection and then our data analyses off of the state of Connecticut. But there are very few states that besides, I'd say, Connecticut and Oregon, that do a really good job of this. Even the states that have done it for a long time do not necessarily do a very good job. I'm born and raised North Carolinian before coming out to Oregon. North Carolina was the first state to collect stops data. However, they have never analyzed their stops data. Some people at the University of North Carolina have, but the state itself has refused to analyze the data that they have collected for over 20 years. And so it's a much more complicated question. And maybe I'm too far in the weeds for a question like that sometimes, but I'd say that in most states, it's kind of a smorgasbord of different things that they collect. I think that if we wanted to be on the cutting edge, maybe information about vehicles and then officer identifiers would be the things we're missing.
And obviously people are really interested in this topic, and I appreciate you taking so many questions. I'm wondering if there's a couple of last things you can leave us with before we need to move on in our agenda.
Sure. So yeah, and that I was a little worried about having 20 minutes and making it through all the data. So what I'll do is I'll submit to Alexis the rest of my presentation, which will have some of the pieces. I would encourage you to go to our website. But what I would mention, at least for the city of Beaverton, is that when we look at the city of Beaverton, it is very much like many of our other Oregon cities, in that at least in the initial analyses that we've collected and analyzed, we look at 3 different decision points: the decision to stop a driver, what happens during the stop as far as the disposition. So it's like whether you got a ticket or you got searched or arrested. And then we look at search practices. And at least with regards to the decision to stop a driver, when we employ our full model, which I don't have enough time to go into tonight, we have yet to find indicators of disparities as far as the decision to stop a driver is concerned. We have found some indicators of disparities when it comes to some of the stop outcomes, and it differs by year as to what we've found. But perhaps what is the most interesting of all the findings, and this is something that if you're really tuned into research or just even in-depth articles about things like stop and frisk are concerned, is that one thing we've really seen, which I think is pretty fascinating, is that during the pandemic, we had this external shock that changed behavior. And one of the behaviors that changed is across the state, at least for the agencies that we could compare year over year, the volume of discretionary searches fell pretty substantially at almost every agency that we analyze. But at the same time, one measurement that we use to look at to make sure that searches are being conducted appropriately is, was there something found during the search? If you're really successful during your searches, then that at least implies that you had good basis to do so. And I mean by finding drugs or weapons or other things. However, and this would be pre-measure 110 in most cases, right? But if you are very unsuccessful, then that means that you are unnecessarily perhaps traumatizing and then searching individuals who did not deserve to be searched. And especially if you have differences between racial groups, that's very, very concerning. But what's interesting is that the number and rate of searches fell pretty substantially, like I mentioned, across the entire state. But at the same time, the number of successful searches or the share of successful searches increased, and in some cases pretty substantially. So I'm going to do real quick, because I'll just jump past all this other stuff that I had prepared. But we'll go to the city of Beaverton's results. And so what we can see here is that the city of Beaverton saw a 30% reduction in its number of searches between 1819 and 1920. At the same time, we saw the share of successful searches for all of our groups that we analyzed. And at least in these initial reports, we've only looked at white, Black, and Latinx communities because we have to allow enough data to accumulate. So we don't have enough searches of Middle Eastern individuals, for example, to do this analysis yet. But you can see the successful searches jumped pretty substantially for every group. And it really goes to what a lot of academics have said for years, that if you are more selective and if you really rely even more directly on your training when making some of these decisions, then across the board, fewer people will be searched, more successful searches will happen, and therefore you will be engaging less often with individuals who did not necessarily need to be searched. And overall, that is a positive for everyone. And so given that I'm probably already over time, that's at least one thing I'd like to leave you all with, because it's something that's kind of nuanced in our report, but I think is very interesting when you compare the search rates year to year. I'd be happy to take any more questions as long as you all have questions to provide. Follow up via email if you'd like to, but I won't take over your time if we're already past that.
Thanks so much, Ken. I already see another question came in, and there might be a couple more, but at this point, I'd like to ask folks to please email Ken directly. If you'd be willing to share your email with us, or if you'd prefer us to work through Alexis, that's fine too.
Alexis has my email. I'd be more than happy if she wants to provide that to the committee. And like I said, I'll send that presentation to her too, and so she can circulate that and provide my email. And then, like I said, feel free to ask questions. I might point you on to some of our researchers who work on these specific analyses so they can answer your question even better. But yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ken, for preparing that very thorough presentation, for answering all of our questions.
Thank you.
Rachel, can I just say one thing? It's not a question. I just want to say thank you, Neil, for inviting Ken. And Ken, I think you look sharp, man. Great outfit choice. I'm glad you wore what you wore. You look nice, in case no one told you today. Thumbs up.
Thank you, Teresa. That's very kind. And it's the best COVID presentation outfit you could have, because you don't get your jacket all wrinkled either.
Always appreciate the positivity. Thank you, Teresa.
Neil, why don't you dress up for us?
I got my polo on.
I see you from here up, Neil.
Well, that's because I had to put, my computer was going to die. I had to plug it in, so it's all cattywampus now. So sorry about that.
All right, thank you guys for being here tonight. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. We have a draft from our working group, temporary working group. I think that was that Ahmed, Brandon, Monije, and Monica gathered together after our last meeting to put together a memo of recommendations to the mayor and city council on spending for those funds that Beaverton is expected to receive from the American Rescue Plan. So I believe everybody received that memo, and I'd like to if at all possible, I'd love to vote to approve that memo if we get to that point today. I realize we're running a little bit shorter on time than anticipated, but I also want to ask if there's any comments at this time on that.
Yeah, Rohana, go ahead.
Yeah, Teresa, you're so funny. It's make me laugh. But yeah, I did have a comment. I don't actually vote to approve that memo as of yet, so I have to leave in a bit to attend another meeting. But yeah, I don't vote to approve that memo at the moment because I don't agree with some of the wording. And my thoughts basically echo what Jody said previously in the public comment, because we use the term historically marginalized in that memo, and I would like to see a specific wording as to BIPOC communities, or or have an addendum that references those communities that would benefit from that money, because it's such a broad term and it could get lost. We need to specify those communities, the poor, the underrepresented, the underprivileged communities, and that's what I want to see in that memo. And I don't agree with that, that wording as such. So, I'd love to hear from other members of the subcommittee as to why they chose that wording and how we can modify it.
Alexis? When we mentioned that, when we are working and hoping to have the multicultural center, community center, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the first point, the short-term goals, where we've said that, don't have the memo in front of me, where we've said, Alexis, can you help me out here?
Yes, I can share screen if that's helpful. I just want you all to be able to see each other, but there's a couple different times where you talk about the DAB is positioned to provide recommendations on how to spend recovery funds to best impact historically marginalized communities. In the short-term goals, it says your goal is to support historically marginalized families. So that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, so my concern is that the money may reach people who do not need it, who we want to make sure that the money gets to the people who really, really need it. And in order for us to do that, we need to specify that it has to go to certain communities, members. And we can provide, I'm concerned really about my community where, people don't like to come forward and say, okay, they're a bit ashamed to admit that they're not, that, they don't have enough salary, or they don't, they're, overpopulated. They'd rather live, like Jody said, they'd rather live in a family with 20 people rather than come forward and say, look, we need the money for an extra, room or food or whatever. So that's where my concern is, how do we overcome that? How do we get that across in the memo?
Can be added to it, the specifics that we're looking for, or the specific people we want to serve can be inserted in that memo. So, because talking about that is exactly what we were talking about, that we want that money to go exactly to that families or group of communities, but we need to be even that careful to see how are we going to do it, how we're going to grab these people who need it. We cannot just give money away like that. We have to be very careful about it. And I do agree with that. That's why we want to have the multicultural center where the people can come and talk to us and see what their needs are. Perhaps we just can add it to the memo, Alexis, some wording about.
Yeah, so first proposal is to modify where it says historically marginalized communities to be more specific. So I will write that down. I see Ugana trying to get in there, and I just wanted to say, I just said in the chat, Brandon asked a question about timing. I did ask the mayor's office that today, and they said that there is actually more timing, and that the mayor and city council are going to do some more public engagement deliberately around the ARPA funds. So it does not have to be approved tonight, you all, for this to be relevant if you're not ready. If you are, great. If you're not, we can keep working on this. Go ahead, Ugana.
Yeah, I think that the committee did a great job. However, I agree with Rihanna. I agree with Jody. A lot of the things they have said is the recommendations here is still going to go towards the same communities. For example, just like Rihanna, my community members would not come forward to access rent assistance or mental health services. These are resources that we do not traditionally access based on our cultural background. We're not fashioned that way. So at the end of the day, many communities are going to be left out of this access to these funds. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can make it culturally specific to some communities. If we leave it broad as it is, majority of our minority communities are not gonna lay claim or are not gonna access these resources. I just want us to bear that in mind. But overall, the community have done a fantastic job, but I'm just concerned that a lot of communities that were also left out during the pandemic are still gonna get left out even at this time. So let's just bear that in mind. Maybe we can amend a little bit and make it a bit culturally specific. I'm just throwing it out there, but I just want to speak from my background, from my community. We don't traditionally access things like mental health resources or rent assistance, or, and also talking about the cultural center, we should also be mindful of who we put there to run it. If we're going to have a cultural center and we have somebody who does not, who's not representative of the community that we serve, most communities would not be willing to come forward and utilize that center. Just what I wanted to share. Thank you very much.
May I say something? I
yes,
think I
others, if you want to get in there, please raise your hand so we can get you in the queue.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Monica.
I think I understand exactly what you say. At the same time, when you were talking, I'm start thinking, and I agree with you, but sometimes I feel like if we mention a specific cultures only, are we going to leave the other ones out? It's going to be the feeling about that, okay, it's only for them and so and so and so. Because culturally, the minority cultures, most are like not willing to talk about mental health or things like that. Majority of the minority cultures are like that. So if we want to specify only some culture for it, or the one or two, my concern will be like, are they going to feel like we're leaving out the other ones? Or can we do an educational in general, information in general for all cultures? That will be my concern. And I'm sorry that I didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry about that. Okay, that's all I want to say.
I saw Rehana wants to respond.
Yeah. I think the solution to that question, Monica, is to have an addendum. And as we become aware of the communities that are in need, we can keep adding to it. That way no one will be left out. And us as DAB members, we represent our communities. So we can start with us, and then as we become aware, we can keep adding them. It'll be like a continual improvement and addition to the memo, to the final draft.
Sorry, I know I was talking a lot tonight. Around the public engagement, I would just kind of be curious around I like things to be transparent. I want to know process. I would like, there's been a fair amount of public engagement around the housing. I think that our communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID. Myself personally have lost direct family members on both sides. There was a week where I thought we all had COVID during my brief run for city council, which was a factor. So it's really hit us hard. And I just want communities the opportunity to like voice like where they're coming from and their experience around this is I see the same thing at the school district, right? In terms of like the no drop. And so the school district has been able to get money for these students, but then it's going to turn around and use that money for things that might not potentially support students. So I'll wrap it up, but I would also advocate for public community comments time or sessions that are kind of open, so it doesn't feel baked. And then even if it is baked, so be it, but at least we're heard. Thank you.
Others who haven't had a chance to share their impressions of the memo, and maybe importantly, whether you think it's ready or not. Hiral, go ahead. Hiral, sorry.
No, I mean, I think it is very well drafted, apart from the wording that mentioned by Rehana. I think apart from that, it has a clear long-term and short-term goals.
Teresa, I see you.
Thank you. I would like to have further discussion on it myself, and I will begin and end with that brief statement. Thank you.
So I guess my question on process would just be, does the subcommittee want to get back together again to kind of take this feedback and think about changes? Or do you all want to spend some time at the July meeting discussing as a large group what feels best? And you can speak up or you could just put it in the chat. Those are two options that I can think of. Sounds like we're not ready to approve tonight, and that's okay that you all are not. See one vote for July meeting. Manija, you had some input there?
Yeah, I was thinking that through via email, the committee kind of get kind of agreement, and then we bring it up back again to July meeting and decide on it.
We can, folks can submit minor edits, but we really can't have a discussion over email. So that's why I'm sort of suggesting, do you all want to get back together in a meeting that we can notice and invite the public to, or do you want to, does this feel like it needs to be everybody here to discuss? So it looks like there's some suggestions for July. Monica, go ahead.
How long I thought it was kind of something quick, but you mentioned that we still have time. What is the time? So going to July, it will be okay.
It will be okay. Yeah, I checked in about that today, and what I heard was that where we thought things were going to move really fast, it sounds like our elected leaders have recognized that they want to take a step back and get some engagement from the community around this issue. So we don't have real specifics of what that looks like yet, but the mayor's office is working on a plan of their own. And so they said that when I asked, does DAB need to get these in for it to be relevant? They said, we have time. We're not going to discuss this at the council or make decisions about the spending right now.
Okay, so that was my biggest concern about the timing, and that's why we requested your extra meeting. I don't know if we wait until July in the meeting of that. That's what we're talking about during the meeting of that for July, or we will have a separate meeting as a subcommittee. How is thinking?
Those were the two options that I was presenting. It sounds like in the chat there are 3 folks that have spoken up and said they would like time as a large group in July. So that's what we've heard so far.
It will be the group, the subcommittee, like we did in May, or during that meeting.
No, yeah, what I'm saying is either the subgroup can get together between now and July, or the whole group can talk about it in July. That would be the reason to have it on the July agenda so that more people can participate. So it sounds like there's some suggestions to have it in July. Oh, there's a suggestion also to have breakouts in July. But anyways, the ability for more people to participate in the July meeting space. It sounds like, or it looks like Raman, you want to get in there quickly. We have to. I'm working on the transition plan to our next topic.
I
Yeah.
was hoping to have a meeting in July with the subcommittee before the DAB meeting, but whatever the majority decide, it will be okay with me. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, I would suggest that we discuss this during July meeting, even with, like, as you have suggested, that we could do a breakout and go into smaller groups and discuss in detail, get back and go over it. It's no use rushing into it. I am with Rehana. We are not ready at the moment, and we should give it a fair go.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, I appreciate it, everybody. We'll bring it back in July. Feel free, of course, to send suggestions in the meantime, but we won't have discussion outside of the July space, at least as far as what I'm hearing right now. And we'll go ahead and move on, and that's okay. Timing is going to be okay. And I will let you know if I find out that that's not true, but it will be fine. So maybe if it's okay, Rachel, I'll just take the next, just transition us directly into introducing Max Wedding, who's joined us here today. Max is an amazing recent asset to the city on loan from PSU to help us put together a Title VI policy for the city, which has been a great need for a while now. So Max, I'm just going to turn it over to you. You all, just so that you know, Deb, I did send Max's current draft of the policy. So you should have gotten that information ahead of time, but he will give you some foundational information right now.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. It's clearly a very thoughtful and intentional group. So I really appreciate getting to work with you all on this. Like Alexis said, I'm a student at Portland State University. I'm on a contract through the Center for Public Service with the City of Beaverton. It's been a great experience, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Let me give a little bit of background into this plan and what it is and what it's for. Title VI references Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In particular, this prohibits discrimination based on 3 specific categories, and those are race, color, and national origin. And anyone, both in the federal government as well as any party that receives federal funding, has to comply with this title. That includes the City of Beaverton. And so in 2015, the Oregon Department of Transportation did an audit of the City of Beaverton's Title VI program. And there were some recommendations that came out of that audit. Alexis and her team and several others did some great work to set some good foundation for this work to happen. So this is the culmination of the response to that audit. And so this Title VI plan is something that all cities and jurisdictions that receive federal funding have to provide and have to create. So most of the portions of this plan are required in some way for compliance with the federal law and the various regulations that have been passed since 1964. So that's a bit of the history of how this came to be. So in particular, this draft speaks to what the city, what are the city's specific responsibilities to comply with Title VI in various different areas. And so I have the ability to share my screen. It looks like I do. So I'll just very quickly go through some of the portions and some sort of caveats to this draft. And then I'll share a little bit of the feedback that I'm hoping to receive from you all, as well as the other groups that I've been speaking with. So this table of contents shows you, and let me make this a little bigger, shows you the different sections that are in the plan. I do want to make a couple of notes. Appendices B and C were not complete by the time of this draft. We've been working on them since then, but they're not included in this draft. I'll make sure that I send them out when the new drafts are done. But those two things are missing from this this particular document. And then there is some language, especially in the environmental justice and the limited English proficiency sections, that is a little dated. These two sections come out of various executive orders that were during the Clinton administration. So they use various terms that are not acceptable in modern modern discourse, but in order to comply with those federal requirements, we do have to use those terms in this plan. So my apologies for some of the language that is in there, but it says things like minority and limited English proficiency and things that just don't necessarily fit well with how we understand them today. So I do want to give a little bit of caution around there. And then the only other piece that I wanted to add is that this document doesn't create a whole lot of new policy. There are some things that the city will have to start doing that it isn't at the moment in order to come into compliance with Title VI. But by and large, what I tried to do with this draft was document a lot of the good work that is already happening, especially through the DEI plan and the climate action plan that the city, those two documents the city already has, as well as various other policies and documents that are already in effect at the city. So there are a couple of new policies, but by and large, it is trying to reflect what the city is already doing. I don't want to take up too much time going through the specifics. I'm happy to if there are specific questions, but I do want to be respectful of the time here and let you all digest this when you can. I was hoping to have feedback by the end of the week, but I would say take whatever time you need with this document. It is a fairly lengthy document at 24 pages, so I completely understand if you need more time with it. We should be able to make whatever work. But I'm happy to answer questions about the document, or if you have had a chance to look at specific sections and have questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. I guess I'll stop there and see if there's any other things that folks would like to talk about.
Would you mind stop sharing there?
Yes, of course.
Everybody, thank you so much for that background.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was a ton of prep materials for this meeting. There was a lot of meaty topics. So I'm not sure if folks have had a chance to look at this or not. But if you have any questions or comments while we have Max here, that would be great. And I would just say that I would sort of offer a little bit more of a poke to say that, like, if you could get feedback by the end of the week, I think that would be really helpful. Whether that's in the form of changes or just an email with a few comments or something like that. If you can't do that and you're like, but I'm gonna do it, I have time to do it next week. If you could just send me a quick email and say, I'm not gonna get it done by Friday, but I can have it to you by next Wednesday, just so that we're not sort of in the space of we're not sure if we're still waiting or not. So try by Friday, let me know if you want more time and let us know sort of when would be really helpful. Go for it, Teresa.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Max. Thank you for your bravery in addressing this board. I know when I was in college, I definitely would not have sought the opportunity to have a conversation with a group of people judging me. No, you did great, so thank you for that. From a research standpoint, since you're helping the city of Beaverton with this Title VI project,
Mhm.
were there any items or things that you came across as surprising? I know you mentioned, and it is documented, that there are some things that the city of Beaverton has not done or is not doing. Were you shocked by any of those things? Like, why aren't they doing those things? That seems like a no-brainer. Or if you could give some examples of your thoughts and opinions on that. And
Sure. I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me, specifically related to the environmental justice portion, there are some, so that in order to comply with that particular executive order, the city needs to be collecting and making decisions based on various pieces of demographic data. So when creating project lists or deciding what projects to do, that executive order requires that the city be documenting, are there any disproportionately high or adverse effects on minority or low income groups in the city. And so again, in air quotes, that's the language that the executive order uses, not the language that I would certainly prefer to use. But so that's the kind of thing that the city will need to start doing. And there are various departments around the city that are making those types of intentional and well thought out efforts towards those things, but it's not systemic across the city in all of the departments. And so what I'm hoping this plan will do is to align all of the departments in the city with a standard sort of operating procedure and a list of questions that each department can ask themselves when planning for whatever project list that they're doing for that year. So that's the thing that comes immediately to mind. But like I said, the city already has a lot of things all well documented and that are in compliance with the federal requirements. So, but that's probably the one that sticks out the most.
Go ahead, Monica.
I'm just reading about the data collection that the cities have. In your mind, do you feel that those collections they have, are they applying and working with it, trying at least to make sure that all the data collection they have is going to be applied to every project around? I'm reading, it's very extensive what they have. So my question is, everything that they have in data collection, it is being applied now? Do you feel like it is, or they need to do better than what they do now?
Probably, and I apologize. It looks like my internet is a little iffy, so my apologies if I go in or out. I think it is probably some departments do it better than others. So some departments will probably need to start doing it better and create a process internally for themselves to do that in a way that they haven't before. Okay. And I couldn't name those particular departments off the top of my head. But that's my guess, is that there are some departments that will have to change some of their practices and processes to do that better. Because that is, I think, one area that the city as a whole, as one entity, is not standardized across the whole city.
Okay. And also I'm reading about the training that the city employees have to have at least once a year in order for them to learn how to apply this data, I assuming. So how you feel about that?
I certainly think that a lot of, so Patricia Anderson-Wick is the HR director. She's been my my compatriot at the city, my central other person. So as the HR director, I think she'll have a lot of work to do to either develop or find those trainings for the city to do. And so I won't, my personal feelings don't necessarily matter in this, but I certainly think that she will probably have a heavy lift, especially if you look at the organization and staffing section, where it lays out the different responsibilities of different people in the organization. Those Title VI liaisons in that section, those are a new piece of policy that we created. And those individuals, we're hoping to have one in every department. We're hoping that those individuals will be the most well versed in Title VI so that they can be sort of the contact and the person who's looking in each department at Title VI for that department. So that those particular individuals will probably need a significant amount of training to get themselves and their departments fully on board with what Title VI will mean for them. That's my guess.
Thank you so much. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think it's time to move on. Max, thanks so much for being here, and I hope that you will be getting lots of feedback from us by the end of the week. Again, folks, please remember to check in with Alexis if you do need a little extra time. Just give her a heads up that that you're taking that time.
Sure. And then Alexis, can you send me any feedback that you receive, or do you want them to send it directly to me? Any way that it works is fine.
Yeah, I think either way is fine. I will definitely, and I think already did share, or no, actually I didn't yet share your email because I wasn't sure what your preference was. Are you okay with them sending directly to you? Okay, so I will share your email. And then also, of course, if I get anything, I will pass it along as well. Thanks very much,
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think if it's okay with Alexis, sounds like it is, we're gonna forego the rest of the topics on our agenda today. Alexis did already send out a staff liaison report, so check your email for that. Is there anything that we really need to know now about the night market, Alexis?
Not that isn't in the email. We just, vendor selection happened and things are moving forward.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate everyone staying a few minutes late tonight for engaging in many heavy topics this evening. And we will look forward to continuing our discussion on the American Rescue Plan Funds memo next month. So again, thanks so much everybody for your continued engagement. And it was great to see you all tonight. Have a good evening and see you next month.
Bye, Ramen. Good to see you.